Round one of the Sinquefield Cup surpassed all expectations. All 5 games were decisive, and first of all I'd like to look at the game between Magnus Carlsen and Veselin Topalov. Remember, they played in round one of the Norway chess tournament, which led to that disastrous tournament for Carlsen as he lost on time. So today he played bishop b5 check. And, well, Carlsen plays this fairly regularly. He wants a fairly calm strategic game, that's with clear strategic ideas, let's say. Probably a good strategy against Topalov, who favours really wild positions. And Topalov, true to form, kept more tension in the position. Instead of playing bishop d7 and exchanging pieces, knight d7 keeps more tension. Of course, black would like to gain the 2 bishops. Knight f6 and rook e1. Of course, the drawback of knight d7 is that black's pieces for a moment are rather clogged up, so often white tries to get a quick attack in this line. And now bishop f1, of course, is a normal move, but bishop d3 has been seen over the past few years. It's a controversial move, of course, because it blocks the d pawn, means it's not so easy to get this bishop up. Sometimes this bishop will come back to c2 after the pawn comes to c3 or c4. Sometimes it'll simply stay on d3 as white will develop his queen's bishop with b3 and bishop b2. It really depends on how black is going to play this position. Topalov plays the most aggressive move, gaining space on the queen side, and perhaps sometimes wants to push with c4 here. Carlsen reacted with c4. Now this position has been seen before. In fact, Carlsen has played in exactly the same way before against Nakamura in Zurich in 2014, and that game went knight e5. The bishop dropped back. The knight took, and well, Carlsen has sacrificed the pawn, but you can see has a big initiative because his king has already castled. Black's is still stuck in the centre, a very typical position for this variation. But instead of that, very quickly Topalov played g5. Now this has never been played before, but it is a recommendation by the Australian Grandmaster David Smurden. Big shout out to Dave, I like this move a lot. It seems bizarre to advance the g pawn, but well, anyone that plays the Najdorf will know that this g-pawn is often advanced in the Najdorf and in the Sicilian when you have a strong centre. When your centre pawns are like this, you can get away with advancing your g-pawn. What you're trying to do is nudge this knight out of the way, and in that way gain control over the e5 square. So in fact it's a very positional move in some ways, but of course with the king still in the middle of the board, this leads to wild complications. I was actually very surprised that Carlsen took this pawn. I mean, there are calmer ways to play the position. For example, one could take on b5, and after g4 the knight comes out to h4, and the bishop drops back. You play knight c3 and d4, and you never know, this knight is lurking out on h4, might sometimes pop into the game onto f5. I didn't shoot correctly with my arrow. It's still very complicated. Black, you could say, will be happy because he's managed to establish his knight on a strong central square, but it's a very double-edged position. But compared to the game, the g file at least is closed. And well, we'll see that sometimes creates difficulties for white. So g5 played. Carlsen, after almost half an hour, that's a long think, took this pawn. And then Topalov took on c4. Now, of course, one could drive this knight out of the way with something like f4, but the knight comes to d3, and in principle I don't like to advance that f-pawn. That really does expose white's king. Carlsen developed a piece. Okay, that's fine. Now rook g8. Again, f4 is possible, but I don't really like that move. Exposes the king too much. Perhaps the most sensible way to play the position is just to drop the knight back, and then you can see that, well, white is probably going to win this pawn back with say a queen b3 move, but it's going to take time to develop that bishop on c1, even once that pawn drops. I mean, it's just a very double-edged position. Black has the two bishops, centre pawns, anything could happen. Instead of that, Carlsen played the most extraordinary idea. He took on c4. Topalov took this. Remember, this knight on g5 is en prise to the rook. So basically, this is a piece sacrifice. So white is a piece down, Carlsen's a piece down, but this knight is attacked. The knight dropped back. Okay, black's king is still in the middle of the board, fine, but how much compensation does white have? Now, it might well have been best to exchange on c5 here. Instead, Carlsen went for it with bishop h5. This was taken, understandably. And now, here, Topalov played rook g7. Again, I find it a slightly surprising move. It seems to me the clearest continuation for black is just to get rid of that dangerous knight and take on d4. And, you know, having got rid of that central pawn, somehow black's position seems a lot safer. And, yeah, somehow this looks like the safest way for black to play. Instead of that, Topalov played rook g7. And now, again, I think taking on c5 seems to me is best. And after this is recaptured, only then taking on h7. And, well, that's still a very double-edged position. Instead, Carlsen took on h7. And once again, I think the simplest way for Topalov to proceed is just to give back an exchange and take on d4. This is maybe even stronger than the last case. You know, once black locks the centre by advancing this pawn to e5, well, he's got two bishops against a rook, or bishop and knight against a rook. Strong centre and, well, I think decent winning chances. Instead, Topalov played queen d7. And Carlsen finally took on c5. And if he takes on f8 now, well, things perhaps aren't so bad. Of course, that can't be taken. That leads to mate. And if we just go back, that means that Topi has to exchange queens. And okay, again, king takes allows bishop h6, not so good. But black can play rook g8 and then trap the knight. Now, this knight has gone, but Carlsen would be able to get a pawn for it. Then he's got three pawns for the piece. Pretty decent drawing chances, I would say. But instead of that, I mean, Carlsen must have seen that. Instead, he gambled. He kept playing for the attack. But this is a clear mistake. Queen c6 threatens mate on g2. Once that's defended, queen g6 forces an exchange of queens under much favourable circumstances. Carlsen tried this move, knight f6 check. Now, of course, if that's captured, then there's a nasty discovered check. But Topalov simply sidestepped. Carlsen had to exchange queens. There was the threat of mate, and in this position, well, Carlsen has 2 pawns for the piece, but that's not enough. And very quickly Topalov actually gained control here. This is what happened, knight c4 and now a blockade, and well, you can see that actually black's pieces are better than white's in this position, and really the rest of the game was very, very easy for Topalov. Well, both players had to negotiate time pressure, but basically it was a very simple win for Topalov. So, huge disappointment for Magnus Carlsen. I could have gone through any of these games today. Really interesting round. But the game that really caught my eye was Aronian against Caruana. Let's have a very quick look at this. We joined the game after 24 moves. Things have gone very well for Aronian. His opening preparation was very good against Caruana's Queen's Gambit. And here you can see that Caruana's king is somewhat exposed on g7, and Aronian exploited this really well. First of all, knight e4. Okay, it's a lovely move, blockading, and then we can perhaps turn our attention to the f file. Maybe we want to play moves like rook f1, queen h5, queen h5. Very dangerous. But Aronian had to calculate knight d4. This is an interesting move. This was the game continuation. Queen h5, so white is just full on the king side. And look at this rook stuck out on a5, not taking part in the game. Of course, he had to calculate what would happen after knight takes rook. So Aronian a full rook down here, but his calculation was excellent. Knight takes g5, and white has a winning attack. If Caruana takes the next rook, then this leads to checkmate. It's rather elegant. Therefore, Caruana defended h7. Rook f1, the attack just goes on. Again, it's black's pieces stuck out on the edge. That rook on a5, the knight on c2, they're not taking part in the game. And this is basically lost. If bishop g6, then rook f7 is going to force mate. Caruana tried queen f6, and now there's a couple of moves that win. Aronian chose knight e6, and this leads to a winning endgame by force. That has to be taken. Rook takes f5. Now, white just wants to recapture on e6, and then the attack just goes through. So Caruana exchanged queens, and now very nice technique from Aronian. So material is now, well, I was going to say level, but Aronian is actually a pawn up, and that pawn on e6 is just too strong. Caruana brought the knight back, and now beautiful calculation from Aronian, threatening to make a queen. The rook has to come back. Rook takes e5, now it's 2 pawns. Threatening e8 queen again, the rook has to blockade. Rook e4, lovely move, forcing the knight to a bad square. If knight takes pawn, then bishop b5 wins material. Therefore, Caruana played knight f5. Now bishop e6. This wins immediately. If knight takes pawn, then bishop d7 wins. And if knight d6, the game continuation, then bishop d7 wins, because after knight takes rook, bishop takes rook, king f6, trying to take the pawn, but then bishop g6 is a very sweet winning move. King takes pawn, bishop takes knight, white is a piece up. Beautiful calculation from Aronian. So, Sinquefield Cup, it's all happening. Carlsen loses in the first round, Caruana loses, of course there'll be no 7 out of 7 for him, and well, it's all to play for. Fantastic tournament. Thanks for watching.